what I would like to do is just ask everyone on the panel to very briefly introduce themselves so that you know who they are. And there is information in your programme about all the people, but just in case you haven't had a chance to look at it, we'll just go along the panel and everyone can just briefly introduce themselves first.
Hello, I'm Geekie from Scottish Government. You probably know that.
And I am Florence Garabedian, Chair of SDSS and Chief Executive of the Lothian Centre for Inclusive Living.
Hello, I'm Cairns from the Coalition of Carers in Scotland.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Paton. I'm a legal officer with MEECOP's 3Rs project.
Good afternoon, I'm Councillor Henderson from the City of Edinburgh Council, and I'm currently the convener of the Integrated Joint Board in Edinburgh.
Fantastic, thank you very much. I'll go with our first question. We've got a good range, so I'll just be reading these out. We'll do one at a time. And then, as I say, if there's time, we'll come back to the floor. So first question was, why can't we have one assessment for criteria across the whole of Scotland rather than 32 different versions? And that question came from Maureen from EDG, and we had a very similar question also from Rob Kerr via Twitter, so it's a popular one. Florence, do you want to give us a response on that?
Right, so I guess you are referring to eligibility criteria, but there is 32 ways of understanding eligibility criteria in Scotland, but there is also 32 ways to do assessments. The reason for that is that in Scotland we have Cllr, local authorities, and we have Scottish Government. And in between we have the Concordat. And that means that although it gives some flexibility and space for local authority to manage the locality business a bit better, for people like us who relate to policies and criteria, it makes our life a bit difficult, because actually if local authorities are indeed accountable to their voters, you know, there is a process for accountability there, the accountability on how policies are delivered is somewhere limited. And that's why, you know, in Glasgow they do it one way, in Inverness they do it another way, in the borders that will be different. And we have the postcode lottery that nobody wants, unfortunately. That's what I would say. Sorry, this morning we heard Kirsten saying, you know, what we should is have a national health and social care service, and I could see many people saying, yeah, and that is a political agenda, and that's something that some of us, if really keen, we need to take it to the politicians.
Thanks, Florence. Cllr, did you want to come in on that?
I did. I just wanted to add that a lot of you may know that the Carers Act is coming in April, and so this issue is quite live in a lot of areas. With the Carers Act also came local eligibility criteria, and as national care organisations we lobbied quite strongly as the Act was going through Parliament to have national eligibility criteria for carers. And we spoke to a lot of politicians, we spoke to Cllr, local authorities, etc., and argued that that would produce greater consistency in terms of providing services and duties through the Act. So I can tell you the arguments that came out against it, which might be useful, and it was very much that the local authorities wanted to be able to set the threshold according to the resources they had and according to demand. So that was very much the sticking point. It wasn't so much about the criteria, which they could broadly agree on, it was about where you put the threshold and being able to move that threshold according to the resources that you have. So I think it's quite a difficult issue to resolve in that respect. What we did manage to agree, fortunately, with the Carers Act was a sort of framework that the national care organisations developed as a best practice model went into the guidance. So we hope there will be some consistency in terms of how carers are assessed and how they decide whether they meet the eligibility criteria or not. But as I said, each area is developing their own, and each area is developing their own threshold as well at the moment.
Okay. Thank you. Anyone else, Vicky?
I hesitate to enter this as a local politician, and at the risk of incurring the wrath of 31 other colleagues across Scotland. I think in principle I wouldn't have any difficulties with common assessment criteria, common policies. Obviously we have to, well, from a local authority perspective, one would argue that you need to respect local democracy and local circumstances. That's the structures that we currently have. But given that the priority here and the object of the exercise is to enable and support people to live good lives, then surely we shouldn't put barriers in the way of that. And I do think that sometimes some of the problems that we experience, certainly what I've come across in Edinburgh, is the multiple layers of complexity that we seem to build in for ourselves, and then scratch our heads when we run into all sorts of barriers and can't deliver what it is that we want to deliver. We create that complexity for ourselves in the first place, and I think simplification would be good.
Okay, thank you. So our next question comes from Ian Fricker, and it is, the background to this question is really based on hearing from quite a few different researchers this morning about what's going on in terms of SDS research, and also with the knowledge that I think Glasgow Caledonian University are looking at having a PhD studentship on SDS in the near future. So the question is, what else do we need research on in relation to self-directed support? What are the gaps?
I think it's worth considering that there's different reasons research is created and published. So I was trying to think this through. There's two kinds of immediate research that I could think of. One is to figure out what works, and the second is to dig into to know what's happening. And I think, remember Richard's input this morning on the evaluability assessment research, and yeah, that was a whole new world for me as well when I first came across that word. But that complicated diagram that was up on the screen is really an attempt to try and codify, to understand what are the key areas that need to progress for self-directed support implementation to be working well. So we would, as a next stage, once we've agreed that framework, be expecting to identify data and/or research that would feed into each of those boxes on the screen. So what research needs to be done, I guess I would answer that question by saying I think we're beginning to have a reasonably clear notion on what needs to be done to understand how implementation is progressing. And it's about those boxes that are up on screen. So for example, there's no existing data at the moment, and nor could there be, about the extent to which people are having good conversations at assessment or with social workers. That's because it's a really tricky qualitative area. But we can perhaps, should we choose to put a bit of short-term research into that. So I think we're moving towards a much better understanding of what research needs to be done, and it'll be a shared understanding. It may be that some of you might like to dig into some of these areas moving forward. So for my answer, please see Richard's diagram.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else want to come in on that?
We're going to just very briefly and simplistically, I would appreciate research into good practice. You know, I'm not adverse to stealing other people's good ideas, and let's not reinvent the wheel. Where people are doing a good job, let's learn from it and implement.
Fantastic. Okay. So, Florence, my next question is directly for you, and it comes from Pauline Nolan via Twitter. And she says, given the value of disabled people's organisations in delivering independent information and so on, who is responsible for the funding crisis for local disabled people's organisations?
For addressing the
funding crisis. Yes. Sorry, there we go. Sorry, there we go. For addressing the funding crisis. There we go. That's a better question.
Yeah, that's a question, Pauline. I mean, that relates to the, I think in one way, it relates to the idea of a national integrated health and social care service, which would make things much easier, not just for disabled people organizations, but potentially for advocacy organizations, you know, carers organizations, organizations which support people both at the center and at the edge of the whole system. At the moment, as I said this morning, you know, all the work of those organizations are not really on the radar of local authorities, and yet they are fundamental. We need to engage in a proper discussion about that, which also relates to how self-directed support is procured, commissioned. You know, it's both a local and strategic approach to commissioning services. What I know is that SDSS is looking at making sure that organizations can demonstrate good practice. You know, that's something our organization is going to work on, and that hopefully will help commissioners, procurement people, you know, to ask the right questions first of all. But also to understand why it is important to have those organizations on board. I'm not sure if I answered your questions, but at the end of the day, you know, it must be addressed. The question of resources, all that work must be addressed.
Okay, thanks, Florence. So we have another question in from Twitter from Linda McCafferty, and her question is on the definition of short breaks. And really, she is saying there seems to be a difference in treatment of carers accompanying a user on short breaks, depending on whether it's deemed to be under option 1 or 2, and whether or not that can then be funded. And there seems to be related to that confusion between carer strategy, Cllr guidance, SDS legislation. And really, I think the question comes down to, fundamentally, should carers and funding be treated differently according to option 1, 2 or 3 in relation to short breaks? So Cllr, you seem the obvious candidate for that.
Yes, I mean the simple answer is no, they shouldn't, but I'll go into a wee bit more detail if I can. I mean, I think it's quite a complex question, this one, but what it really comes down to is the definition of short breaks, and there is no legal definition of short breaks in legislation. So with the Social Care Act, there's no definition, but the guidance says there should be a broad approach taken in relation to short breaks, and it mentions various examples. So, for example, replacement care, where somebody might come into the home and replace the care that an unpaid carer currently provides, or the person who requires care going into residential care for a period. But also more innovative things such as the carer and the person they care for having a break or an activity together. So all these things are mentioned in guidance, but like I say, they're not part of a legal definition. And the Carers Act then is similar. It's effectively done the same thing. There was a lot of discussion as the bill was going through about whether there should be a legal definition of short breaks, and there were pros and cons. There was a feeling if there was, it could be over time constrictive because you don't know how things are going to change. But on balance, certainly as an organisation, we were lobbying for there to be a definition of short breaks so people knew where they stood. And because there is no definition, the intention of both acts is very clear. Like I say, it should be about benefits to the carer. It should be about solutions that the carer puts forward and how best they can be supported. And it may be a solution which involves the person they look after as well. So it may not be about them always having time apart. And if you take it a bit beyond short breaks and actually take in support as well, it can be all sorts of innovative things. And I'm sure, I wasn't here this morning, but I'm sure you heard lots of examples about people using budgets for things like buying a treadmill, buying an iPad. We've had examples of people buying cinema tickets rather than an older person going to daycare and going to the cinema together. So there are lots of good examples across Scotland around this. But unfortunately, legislation has been interpreted differently by different local authorities. Some have put restrictions around what they are deeming a short break, and it makes it hard then for carers to access necessarily what they're looking for. And I happen to know the carer in question. I happen to know one of the issues that carers in their area are experiencing is around a holiday break taken with the person they care for, and a specific local authority saying that isn't being deemed as a short break. So I think that gets to the heart of it really. Our opinion is that, like I say, the intention of legislation is clear. There are examples and guidance around this, and it should be counted as one. And it shouldn't matter what option you take either in terms of self-directed support. So we would like to see a more progressive attitude on this, but it isn't being interpreted the same across Scotland.
Okay. Thanks very much, Claire. And then I've got a couple more from Twitter, and then it'll be open to the floor if there's time. So from Terry McHugh, now this question is, why are some people in Glasgow being told that they can't use services out with Glasgow unless they take a direct payment? Now, clearly we don't have anyone here representing Glasgow on the panel, so I guess from that sense we can't speculate, but I wonder if anybody on the panel would like to comment on what they would see as good practice around that kind of area. So, you know, actually what might be good practice around how you could access services out with an authority, you know, regardless of direct payment. Jennifer, you look like you're looking to get in.
Yeah, as you said, I don't know the specifics of the situation in Glasgow, so I can't really comment on that. But I would say if that's potentially a barrier that's being put in people's way in accessing services, not everyone, for whatever reason, is going to be able to use a direct payment. I would say that's kind of running contrary to the principles of the Act. That's what I would say if someone came to me with that issue, I think. So though I don't know the specifics of that situation, I think that maybe highlights some of the concerns around the different approaches that are being adopted and the amount of discretion that the Act does give to the different local authorities. I think that's why issues like this and the issues that Cllr was talking about a minute ago as well, I think that's why those arise.
Okay.
I think it shows the importance of communication, you know, the importance of how the local authority, and when I say the local authority, that is many people, you know, how the message is communicated about choices and options, and very quickly, you know, a message can become a kind of Chinese whisper, and it starts as hello and finishes as kulo, you know. So it just reinforces, you know, the importance of very, very good communication strategy, and also independent information. I can just say in Glasgow there is the Glasgow Rosen Centre for Inclusive Living, but there is also Glasgow Disability Alliance. You know, they are disabled people organizations, and they will be able to provide independent information.
Perfect. Thanks, Florence. And so a final one from Terry, which is just around why is there no automatic assessment in Glasgow for disability-related expenditure when a budget is implemented and a contribution asked for? So that's really around saying that when you're putting something in place and you're looking at contribution of charging, as some people might know that or understand it, why is disability-related expenditure not automatically being factored into that? So Cllr, I think you might have something to say on that.
This is going to be quite a similar answer to I gave to the last one, to be honest with you, because what it comes down to is the heart of it is charging guidance for non-residential services, which again is developed locally rather than nationally. And although Cllr has their guidance in relation to local authorities developing their local charging guidance, I think it just says something along the lines of you may want to consider disability-related expenditure. So it definitely doesn't say that local authorities have to consider it in their financial assessment, just that they might want to consider it. And the other layer to that is local authorities don't have to use the Cllr charging guidance. They can develop their own charging guidance out with that. And if you look across Scotland and the different charging guidance, they all differ hugely Charges differ in terms of how much people are being charged, and then what is taken into account in the financial assessment in terms of, levers, and in terms of what part of their finances is kept for themselves and so is kept to one side, etc., which means there is massive differences across Scotland in terms of charging. And it's an even more complicated landscape now, because they're going to be, as you'll probably know, extending free personal care to under 65s, which is going to complicate things even further. And you've also got waiving charges for carers, which again is quite a complicated charging policy whenever you take into account replacement care, which can be delivered to the cared for person. So I feel actually for local authorities in terms of how complex these things are, but certainly when it comes to finding out what you're being charged for, it can be really difficult to dig down and understand how the local authority has arrived at the charge which you end up with if you're using services. So I think disability-related expenditure, everybody would agree, is very important. It probably will be written into every charging policy in Scotland, but in terms of that financial assessment, it doesn't always come up, and it isn't always part of the conversation.
Okay, thanks Claire. So, do we have time to take a few questions from the room? Perfect, we do. So I've got Laura down here at the front who's got the roving mic. Do we have somebody? Right, Jeremy, your chance to get some exercise. There we go, thank you.
Hi.
Laura, sorry, if you could just say who you are as well and what your question is, that would be perfect.
Hello, I'm Laura and I'm from Alzheimer's Scotland. I'm not so much sure if I've got a fully formed question as whereas I'm maybe sharing some pain, but I'm already starting to hear about, I guess when I talk to people with dementia about the potential of self-directed support, one of the things that potentially convinces people around it is the possibility of overnight support. Because this is quite a new thing. This is not something that generally gets offered off the shelf for people living with dementia and their families. And it can make such a difference if people get it. And now, with what's happening around Scottish Living Wage and overnight support, we're already starting to hear local authorities say, not a chance. Not even within the realms of SDS. That's already an inquiry that's come to me, and I kind of foresee a bit more of that. I suppose I was just interested in what people in the room think how are we going to tackle that? How are we going to challenge that, I suppose, to kind of almost prevent that being the party line?
Okay, excellent question, thank you. Anybody like to jump in on that? Florence, you look keen?
Not just
Anyone else?
I can.
Jennifer, yeah, you go for it.
Have a shot. I think that is an issue that we're seeing. I do think there's maybe been some legal work done in Glasgow around the rates for overnight care, so I think there maybe is potential for legal challenge there. I don't know the specifics of that, but that's something that is, I think, happening. So potentially, I think there could be a legal challenge or a judicial review at some point in that kind of area, potentially.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer. Claire, did you want to come in?
Not really, but certainly until about a year ago, the Scottish Government was collecting statistics around respite care and looking at the number of hours that local authorities provided. And over time that they were doing that, I think it was 3 or 4 years they were collecting these statistics, there was a trend which was showing up, which was overall local authorities were increasing the hours of respite care, but it was an increase in daytime hours and continually a decrease in overnight hours. And you know, those statistics as well also showed that some local authorities were reducing hours overall, and some had a higher increase, which meant overall they were meeting their agreement, you know, which meant they were able to fulfil their manifesto commitment to the Scottish Government. But generally speaking, it did show a decrease, and it was for the reasons that, you know, already have been discussed, in that it's more expensive provision is the bottom line.
Yeah. I suppose a question for me is, if somebody has a budget and their priority and their outcomes are around overnight care, I think the question for me would be, why are they not allowed to spend their money if they've taken a direct payment? Local authorities...
We're trying to make that a challenge at the moment, and we're trying to sort of use the language of the legislation, but the message that the staff that the frontline workers that we're working with are absolutely, you understand, but are basically saying that we've got the message from on high, there's to be no more. Even within SDS.
There have to be priorities made and hard decisions often within the realms of the budget. So that's a clear thing that might affect that, because obviously overnights paid to the living wage do. But where an individual has a budget and wishes to make choices within that budget, the legislation would suggest that choice and control is within their gift, particularly if they go for an option one. So I'm interested in that blanket decision, but I don't know any of the details.
Can I just add as well what absolute false economy it is? Because frequently when you speak to carers, the one thing they say is what I want more than anything else is sleep. And one of the first things that will affect your health and well-being is lack of sleep. So, I mean, all I'll say is I realise it's a problem. I don't have the solution, but it is definitely false economy.
It's the real frustration, because it's an example of what could be really good SDS in terms of supplementing the support, the natural support that's already there, because that's exactly what they're saying. We want to do the during the day stuff, we just want to be able to do it.
Yeah. Okie doke. Thank you very much. I think we've got time for just one more question. Oh, we've got one over there. Jeremy, if you can leg it over there. Yes, I think that's, I've not missed anyone, have I?
Hello, I'm Morna. My question kind of ties in quite well with the previous question, with what you said, Susan, about if it falls within budget. If you have a budget, you presumably have the right to spend your budget as you choose. Glasgow City Council, and I'm sorry, Glasgow's getting a bad rap today, but Glasgow City Council has a policy that says you cannot choose to spend your self-directed support to enable a young person to go to college. Now, I think there are two questions here. There may be an issue that you'd never get a big enough budget to support someone to go to college. I can see that. But you could presumably choose to top up your budget or whatever, and that would be your choice. But Glasgow City Council on its website has a policy that says it will not, and I believe there have been legal challenges, and I'm just interested to know if that's actually legal. Can they do that?
Okay, very good question. Sorry to think. Go on, Florence.
I mean, it comes to the root of the problem, which is how can flexible a budget can be, how freedom should have a person to use his or her budget. That's it. The issue in Glasgow is with funding education, if you like, or support to education. In other local authorities, it will be something else. And as we know that people are different and will have different needs, the issue is why, 4 years into the Act, we still cannot have people using the budget more freely towards the outcomes. It's not saying that people can use the money whatever they want, of course not, but why? That's the problem.
Ricky, I'm going to bring you in now.
Okay, and thanks, Jess. I think it's probably more than my life is worth to enter into an argument about what Glasgow Council are doing and whether it's legal or not. But we could make a more general point, which I think probably does cover Edinburgh and other authorities. I mean, Karen mentioned earlier in the presentation about the direction of travel and said we're not there yet, and it's a big job, it's a big task. And I think there is something about a culture change here as well. SDS was introduced with quite a lot of fanfare a few years ago, and we were very positive in Edinburgh about implementation. But I think we have lost our way a little bit since, for lots of reasons that I won't try and justify just now. But I think it is about a direction of travel, and it is about testing boundaries and defining things and possibly challenging where you think that's appropriate, so that we all learn as we go, and we keep in mind this principle about living the good life and about the person, making a person-centred decision, as NHS colleagues are fond of saying. And I think provided we keep pushing in that direction, then we will resolve a lot of these issues along the way.
Brilliant. Thank you. And I think that's kind of the perfect note to wind up on, if no one else wanted to jump in there. you know, I think that's one of the things we've been trying to achieve today, is folk coming together, sharing good practice, and hopefully folk will go away and do that. I just have a few things that I want to say. So thank you, first of all, you guys, for answering the questions so honestly and openly on the panel. We really appreciate that. Thank you to all our speakers from this morning, all the workshop hosts. I know you put so much into that today, and everyone in the marketplace as well. Huge thanks to our PAs. I think they're still here, our lovely team of PAs, and our wonderful BSL interpreters who've been doing sterling work throughout the day. And huge thanks also to the team at SDSS, who I know look super slick and relaxed, but have been working quite hard to pull today together. So massive thanks to all of them, and our wonderful management committee, because ultimately it's them who lead the organisation and give us our sense of direction and passion. And also, not to go without thanks to the team here at the AICC, who I think have been consummate professionals and done a fantastic job for us all and kept us all right. And the biggest thanks of all to you guys for coming along. As I said this morning, I know folk have come from far and wide, and many of you have stuck it out to the hopefully not so bitter end. Yeah, we really appreciate you coming and sharing your good practice and your ideas and your thoughts, and we really do hope that it won't be just about today, that you will take what you've learned and what you've shared and you will build on it as you go about your day-to-day lives, whatever your role in SDS implementation. And as I said before, a lot of the stuff from today, so the presentations will be on our website. We will be doing a short bit of all the video and all the rest of it from the day, so you'll be able to see kind of what's been captured and you know, as a follow-up from today. And the other thing to mention is just for those of you who don't know, that SDSS, we are actually a membership organisation, and our members are local organisations who are working to support people through their SDS journey and helping to promote SDS good practice across Scotland. So if you're not already involved and you want to be part of this journey of making things better for everyone in SDS in Scotland, then please speak to us about membership. And Mark, who many of you will know, is the person who looks after all our members. Give us a wave, Mark, please. So you can chat to Mark about whether you'd be interested in joining us as a member if you haven't already. Finally, please do let us know what you thought about today, because that's really useful for us to learn from and to know that if we do something like this again, what we would do the same, what we would do differently, better, all that sort of stuff. So there's a big plastic box on your way out to put your evaluation form in, but if you don't get the chance to do it today, we will also be emailing you so you can do it online. If that's everything, excellent. Okie doke, thank you ever so much. Thank you.